The preacher's wife found Eliza Vaughn crying in the church garden at dawn. And by noon, the entire town of Hachita, New Mexico, knew she was carrying a child out of wedlock. The whispers started before the sun reached its zenith that September day in 1878. Eliza sat in her mother's parlor, her hands folded in her lap, listening to the muffled argument taking place in the kitchen. Her father's voice boomed through the thin walls, full of righteous fury and wounded pride. Her mother's softer tones tried to reason with him, but Eliza knew it was futile. Marcus Vaughn was a respected merchant in town, a deacon at the church, and his reputation meant everything to him. The door burst open, and her father stood there, his face red with anger and something else, something that looked almost like grief. "You will leave tomorrow morning," he said, his voice shaking. "I have made arrangements for you to go north to the mountains. There is a settlement there, small and remote. No one will know you or our family." "Father, please," Eliza whispered, but he held up his hand. "You have shamed this family. You have shamed me. I cannot look at you without thinking of what you have done, what you have become." He turned away, his shoulders rigid. "Your mother will help you pack." Eliza's mother came to her that night, pressing coins into her hand and a small carpet bag filled with what provisions she could spare. "There is a trading post near the settlement," she whispered. "Ask for a man named Robert Barrett. He is a mountain man, comes down to trade his furs. He is a good man, they say. He might help you find shelter." "Mama, I am so sorry," Eliza said, tears streaming down her face. Her mother kissed her forehead, her own eyes wet. "I know, child, I know." The next morning came too quickly. Eliza stood in the pre-dawn darkness, her bag at her feet, watching as her father loaded a small wagon. He would not look at her. He would not speak to her. Her younger brother Thomas, just 16, hugged her tightly before their father barked at him to get inside. The ride out of town was silent, except for the creaking of the wagon wheels and the sound of horses' hooves on the hard, packed earth. Her father took her as far as the stage stop in Deeming, pressed money into her hand without meeting her eyes, and left her there without a word of goodbye. Eliza watched him drive away, and something inside her hardened. She placed her hand on her still flat stomach and made a silent vow. She would survive this. She would survive for her child. The journey north took 3 days by stage, then another day by hired wagon. The driver, an older man with kind eyes, tried to make conversation but gave up when Eliza could not find words past the lump in her throat. The landscape changed as they climbed into the mountains, the desert scrub giving way to pine forests and rocky peaks. The air grew cooler, crisper, and carried the scent of wood smoke and wild things. The settlement was hardly worthy of the name. A dozen rough cabins scattered among the trees, a trading post that looked like it might blow over in a strong wind, and a small stable. The wagon driver helped her down and pointed to the trading post. "That is where you want to go," he said gently. "The man who runs it, name of Barrett, he knows everyone around here. He can help you get settled." Eliza paid him and watched as he drove away, leaving her standing alone with her carpetbag in the middle of a place that felt like the edge of the world. She took a deep breath and walked toward the trading post, her boots crunching on the frost-covered ground. It was late October now, and winter was coming fast to the mountains. The door creaked when she pushed it open. The interior was dim, smelling of leather and tobacco and something wild she could not name. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with goods, traps hanging from the ceiling and pelts stacked in the corner. A man stood behind the counter, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell past his collar and a beard that covered the lower half of his face. He looked up when she entered, and she saw his eyes were a startling blue, bright and clear in his weathered face. "Can I help you, miss?" His voice was deep, rough from disuse but not unkind. "I am looking for Robert Barrett," Eliza said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You found him." He set down the knife he had been sharpening and gave her his full attention. "What brings you up to these parts?" Eliza hesitated. She had not thought about what to say, how to explain. "I need shelter. Work, if there is any. I was told you might know of something." Robert studied her for a long moment, and she felt herself flush under his gaze. She knew what he was seeing, a young woman alone, far from anywhere civilized, with fear in her eyes and secrets she could not hide. "Not much work around here," he said finally. "Most folks are trappers, hunters. Live pretty solitary. I can cook, clean, mend. I can read and write. I can do sums." Eliza heard the desperation creeping into her voice and hated it. Robert's expression softened slightly. "You running from something or to something? Does it matter?" she asked, meeting his eyes. He considered this, then shook his head. "I suppose it does not." He came around the counter, and she saw he was even bigger than she had thought, well over 6 feet, with the build of a man who lived a hard life outdoors. But his movements were careful, deliberate, as if he was trying not to frighten her. "I have a cabin about 2 miles from here, up in the high country. It is just me and my dog. I could use help with the cooking and such, especially with winter coming on. The work is hard and the pay is not much, but you would have a roof over your head and food to eat." Relief flooded through her so suddenly she felt dizzy. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much. Do not thank me yet. It is rough living up there, cold, lonely, not fit for most women." He searched her face. "You sure you want to do this?" "I am sure," Eliza said, because what choice did she have? Robert nodded and grabbed a heavy coat from a peg on the wall. "Come on then. We are losing daylight and the trail is not easy in the dark." He had a horse tied outside, a sturdy mountain-bred mare, and he helped Eliza up into the saddle before swinging up behind her. She stiffened at the closeness, but he kept a respectful distance as much as he could, one arm loosely around her waist to steady her as they started up the trail. The path wound through dense forest, climbing steadily, and Eliza could see why he had said it was not easy. Rocks jutted out at odd angles, roots crossed the path, and more than once the horse had to pick her way carefully around a fallen log. They did not speak during the ride. Eliza was too tired, too overwhelmed by everything that had happened in the past days. She felt the warmth of Robert's body behind her, solid and real, and found it oddly comforting. When they finally emerged into a clearing, she saw the cabin and felt her heart sink a little. It was small, rough-hewn logs chinked with mud, a stone chimney, and a single window with actual glass in it. But it was solid, well-built, and smoke rose from the chimney. "I came down earlier to bank the fire," Robert explained as he helped her down. "Keeps the place from freezing while I am at the trading post." A dog came bounding out from behind the cabin, a massive creature with thick fur and intelligent eyes. It barked once, then seemed to sense Robert's calm and came forward to sniff at Eliza curiously. "That is Bear," Robert said. "He is friendly enough once he knows you." Eliza held out her hand tentatively, and the dog sniffed it before licking her fingers. She smiled despite herself, the first real smile in days. Inside, the cabin was sparse but clean. A large fireplace dominated one wall, with a pot hanging over the flames. A rough table and 2 chairs sat in the center of the room, a bed in one corner covered with furs, shelves along the walls holding supplies and tools. A ladder led up to a loft space under the roof. "You can have the loft," Robert said, reading her thoughts. "I will sleep down here. There are extra furs up there, should keep you warm enough." Eliza climbed the ladder and found the loft was actually larger than it looked from below, with a small window at one end and enough space to stand in the center. Furs and blankets were piled in one corner, and the space smelled of wood and leather, and something indefinably masculine. When she climbed back down, Robert had set out bread and dried meat on the table, along with 2 tin cups of water. "It is not much," he said, almost apologetically, "but it will fill your belly." They ate in silence, and Eliza found herself sneaking glances at him. He was probably in his late 20s, she guessed, maybe 30 at most. Old enough to have lived hard, but young enough that it had not broken him. His hands were scarred and calloused, the hands of a man who worked with them, who knew how to survive in this harsh place. There was a gentleness to him, though, a quietness that put her somewhat at ease. "Can I ask you something?" Robert said suddenly. Eliza tensed. "You can ask. How old are you?" 20, she said. "I will be 21 in December," he nodded slowly. "You are running from something. I can see it in your eyes. I am not going to pry, but I need to know if someone is going to come looking for you, if there is going to be trouble." "No," Eliza said quickly. "No one is coming, I promise you that." Robert studied her for a long moment, then nodded again. "All right, I believe you." He stood and began clearing the table. "Get some rest. Tomorrow I will show you around, explain what needs doing. We have about a month before the real snow starts, and there is a lot to prepare." Eliza climbed to the loft and burrowed into the furs, exhausted beyond measure. She expected to lie awake, her mind racing, but instead she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, the first peaceful rest she had known in weeks. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Eliza woke to the smell of coffee and found Robert had already been up for hours. He had breakfast ready, venison and cornmeal mush, and they ate together as he outlined what her duties would be. Cooking, mending, helping to prepare the meat and furs from his trapping, keeping the cabin clean and the fire going. In return, she would have shelter, food, and a small wage in coin or trade goods. The work was indeed hard. Robert ran a trap line that covered miles of mountain territory, checking it every few days. When he brought back animals, Eliza had to help skin and prepare them, work that made her stomach turn at first, but that she learned to tolerate out of necessity. She cooked over the open fire, learning to make bread in a Dutch oven. To stretch their supplies with wild plants Robert showed her how to identify. She mended his clothes, heavy buckskin and wool that required thick needles and strong thread. Her hands, soft from a life in town, grew rough and calloused. But she also found a strange kind of peace in the routine. The mountains were beautiful in a way that took her breath away, the peaks white with early snow, the forests alive with elk and deer and smaller creatures. Robert was a quiet companion, often going hours without speaking, but when he did talk, his words were thoughtful, considered. He told her about the mountains, about the animals and the weather patterns, about the few other trappers and hunters who lived in the area. He never asked about her past, never pried into her secrets, and she was grateful for that. As October turned to November, Eliza's body began to change in ways she could no longer hide. Her dresses grew tight across the middle, and she had to let out the seams. She caught Robert looking at her sometimes, his expression unreadable, but he said nothing. The morning sickness that had plagued her for weeks finally eased, but it was replaced by a constant fatigue and an aching in her back. One evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Robert finally broke the silence. "How far along are you?" Eliza felt her face flush hot. "I do not know what you mean." "Yes, you do." His voice was gentle, without judgment. "I grew up on a farm. I know what a woman with child looks like." Tears pricked at her eyes, and she looked down at her hands. "4 months, maybe 5. I am not entirely sure." Robert was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. "The father, gone. He was a gambler passing through town. He made promises he had no intention of keeping. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. I was a fool. You were young. He was the fool for leaving you. Robert stood and added another log to the fire. This changes things, you know. You cannot be doing the heavy work much longer. And when the baby comes, we will need supplies, things I do not have here. I can still work, Eliza said quickly, panic rising in her chest. I can still earn my keep. I am not turning you out, Robert said, and there was something fierce in his voice that made her look up at him. I am saying we need to plan. Winter is coming and you will need proper care. There is a woman, lives about 10 miles east of here with her husband, used to be a midwife. I can take you to meet her, see if she will come when your time is near. The relief that flooded through Eliza was so intense she started to cry, great, heaving sobs that she could not control. Robert crossed to her, awkward and uncertain, and placed a hand on her shoulder. It will be all right, he said quietly. I give you my word, you and the baby will be all right. Over the next weeks, Robert was true to his word. He took Eliza to meet the midwife, a woman named Sarah who was in her 50s with strong, capable hands and a warm smile. Sarah examined Eliza and declared both mother and baby healthy, giving detailed instructions about diet and rest and what signs to watch for. Robert listened to every word, his brow furrowed in concentration, and when they left, he made Eliza repeat everything back to him so he would remember. The first real snow came in late November, a heavy fall that blanketed the mountains in white. Eliza stood at the cabin window, watching the flakes drift down, and felt a hand on her lower belly as the baby moved for the first time. She gasped, pressing her palm there, feeling the flutter of life. You all right? Robert asked from where he was working on a new trap. The baby moved, she whispered, wonder in her voice. Robert set down his tools and came to stand beside her. Can you feel it now? Yes, like butterflies. She looked up at him and saw something in his eyes, something soft and almost tender. On impulse, she took his hand and pressed it to her belly. Wait, maybe you can feel it too. They stood there for a long moment, Robert's large hand warm against her, and then the baby moved again. Robert's eyes widened. I felt it, he breathed. I felt the baby. Something shifted between them in that moment. Eliza felt it, saw it in the way Robert looked at her, and her heart began to beat faster. She had grown comfortable with him over the past months, had come to trust him, but this was something more, something deeper. The winter closed in around them, and they were trapped together in the small cabin for days at a time when the snow was too heavy for Robert to check his trap lines. They talked more during those long evenings, sharing stories of their pasts. Robert told her about growing up in Missouri, about losing his parents to fever when he was 18 and heading west to make his own way, about learning to trap and hunt from an old mountain man who had taken him under his wing, about choosing this solitary life because he had never fit well with civilized society, had always felt more at home in the wild. Eliza told him about her life in Hatchita, about her father's store and her mother's garden, about the young man who had swept her off her feet with his charm and his promises, who had left town 3 days after she gave herself to him, about the shame and the fear when she realized she was with child, the look on her father's face when he learned the truth. He should have stood by you, Robert said fiercely. Your father. He should have protected you, not sent you away. He protected his reputation, Eliza said quietly. That was always more important to him than I was. Robert reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle around hers. His loss, he said simply. December brought Christmas, and Robert surprised Eliza by riding down to the trading post despite the snow and returning with sugar, dried fruit, and even a small jar of precious cinnamon. Together they made a simple cake, and Robert produced a carved wooden rattle he had been working on in secret for the baby. Eliza held it, tears streaming down her face, overcome by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for taking me in, for being so kind. I do not know what I would have done without you." "You would have survived," Robert said. "You are stronger than you think." That night, as the fire burned low and the wind howled outside, Eliza realized she was falling in love with him. The knowledge terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. How could she love someone after what had happened with the gambler? How could she trust her own heart again? But this was different. Robert had never tried to charm her with pretty words or empty promises. He had simply been there, steady and solid, showing her through his actions what kind of man he was. January was brutally cold, with snow piled high against the cabin walls. Eliza was huge now, her belly enormous, and moving was difficult. Robert took over all the heavy work, insisting she rest. He cooked the meals, kept the fire going, and even tried his hand at mending, though he cursed the needle and thread something fierce, which made Eliza laugh until her sides ached. One night in late January, Robert was sitting in the chair by the fire, cleaning his rifle, when Eliza came down from the loft more slowly than usual. "My back hurts," she said. "It has been aching all day." Robert looked up sharply. "Different from the usual ache." "Yes, sharper." "And it comes and goes." Robert was on his feet immediately. "Could be the baby is coming. Sarah said you had until February, but babies come when they are ready." He began pulling on his heavy coat. "I am going to ride for Sarah. You stay here, keep warm, and do not panic." "Robert, it is snowing. The trail will be dangerous in the dark." "I know these mountains better than I know my own face," he said, strapping on his snowshoes. "I will be back with Sarah before dawn. You keep that fire going and time the pains if they get worse." He was gone before she could protest further, disappearing into the snowy darkness with Bear at his heels. Eliza stood at the window, watching until she could no longer see him, then made her way back to the fire and tried not to be afraid. The pains came harder and closer together as the night wore on. Eliza paced the cabin, pausing when a contraction seized her, breathing through them the way Sarah had taught her. She tried to stay calm, tried to remember everything she had been told, but fear clawed at her throat. Women died in childbirth all the time, especially out here far from doctors and proper care. What if something went wrong? What if the baby was breech or the cord wrapped around its neck? The door burst open just as dawn was breaking, and Robert stumbled in with Sarah behind him. He was covered in snow, his face red from the cold, but his eyes found Eliza immediately, and she saw the relief there. "I am all right," she said quickly. "The pains are close now, maybe 5 minutes apart." Sarah took charge immediately, sending Robert to heat water and fetch clean cloths while she examined Eliza. "You are doing fine, dear," she said in her calm, capable way. "First babies take their time. We have hours yet, I would wager." She was right. The labor went on all through the day and into the evening. Robert stayed close, holding Eliza's hand when the pains were bad, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement. His presence steadied her, gave her something to focus on besides the pain. Finally, as the sun was setting and the cabin was filled with long shadows, Sarah said, "It is time to push." Eliza bore down with all her strength again and again, until she thought she could not do it any more. Then Robert leaned close and whispered in her ear, "You are the strongest person I know. You can do this, just a little more." And she did. With one final push, the baby slipped into Sarah's waiting hands. There was a moment of terrifying silence, and then a loud, angry wail filled the cabin. "A boy," Sarah announced. cleaning the baby quickly and wrapping him in soft cloth before placing him in Eliza's arms. A big, healthy boy. Eliza looked down at her son, at his red, wrinkled face and the dark hair plastered to his head, and felt a love so overwhelming it stole her breath. "Hello," she whispered. "Hello, my sweet boy." Robert stood beside the bed looking down at them both, and Eliza saw tears on his cheeks. "He is perfect," Robert said hoarsely. "Absolutely perfect." Sarah stayed for 3 days, making sure both Eliza and the baby were doing well before she allowed Robert to take her home. When they were alone again, just the three of them and Bear, the cabin felt different somehow. Fuller, more like a real home. Eliza named the baby Ethan, after her grandfather, and Robert carved his name and birth date into one of the cabin beams. As winter slowly gave way to early spring, they fell into a new rhythm. Robert was endlessly patient with the baby, walking him when he cried at night so Eliza could rest, making silly faces to get him to smile. Eliza would wake sometimes to find Robert sitting by the fire with Ethan in his arms, talking to him in a low voice about the mountains and the animals, about all the things he would teach him when he was older. One evening in March, after Ethan was asleep in the cradle Robert had built, Eliza came down from the loft to find Robert waiting for her. "Sit with me," he asked, gesturing to the bench by the fire. She settled beside him, and they sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Robert said, "I need to tell you something." Eliza's heart began to pound. "What is it?" "I have been alone for a long time. Chose to be alone because it seemed easier than trying to fit into a world that did not want me. But these past months, having you here, having Ethan, I realized I was not living before. I was just existing." He turned to look at her, and the expression in his eyes made her breath catch. "I love you, Eliza. I love you, and I love that boy upstairs like he was my own. I know I have no right to say this. I know you might not feel the same way, but I had to tell you. I had to be honest." Eliza felt tears spill down her cheeks. "Oh, Robert, I love you too. I have loved you for months now, but I was afraid to say it, afraid you might think I was just grateful or trying to secure my position here." "You could never be just grateful," Robert said, reaching up to cup her face in his hand. "You are the bravest, strongest woman I have ever known. You have been through hell and come out the other side still able to love, still able to hope. That takes more courage than anything I have ever done." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, but Eliza closed the distance between them and kissed him. It was gentle at first, tentative, but then Robert's arms came around her and she melted into him, feeling safe and wanted and loved for the first time in so long. When they finally pulled apart, Robert rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he whispered. "Be my wife. Let me be a father to Ethan. Let me spend the rest of my life making you happy." "Yes," Eliza said without hesitation. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They rode down to the small settlement the next week, Ethan bundled warmly against Eliza's chest. The minister was a circuit rider who came through once a month, and he agreed to marry them in the trading post with Sarah and her husband as witnesses. It was simple, no fancy dress or flowers, but when Robert slipped a ring onto her finger, one he had traded for and had waiting for weeks, Eliza felt her heart swell with joy. That night, in the cabin that was now truly their home, Robert made love to her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the firs, listening to Ethan's soft breathing from the cradle. "Thank you," Eliza whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me when everyone else looked away, for welcoming me when I had nowhere else to go, for loving me and my son." "Our son," Robert corrected gently. "Ethan is ours now, and you never have to thank me for loving you. It is the easiest thing I have ever done." Spring brought new life to the mountains. The snow melted, revealing green meadows and rushing streams. Robert taught Eliza to fish, and they spent warm afternoons by the water with Ethan sleeping in a sling against Eliza's chest. She learned to identify animal tracks and edible plants, learned to move quietly through the forest and read the weather in the clouds. Summer was glorious, long days full of sunshine and the smell of pine. Ethan grew chubby and happy, his laughter ringing through the cabin. Robert was a natural father, endlessly patient and loving. He carved toys for the baby, built a better cradle, fashioned a carrier he could wear on his back so Ethan could go with him on short trips. One evening in July, as they sat outside watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink, Eliza said, "I want to write to my mother." Robert looked at her in surprise. "Are you sure? I have been thinking about it for weeks. She deserves to know she has a grandson, that I am all right. I do not expect her to write back. I do not even know if she will read it, but I need to try. Then we will ride to the trading post tomorrow and get paper and ink," Robert said, squeezing her hand. Eliza wrote a long letter, telling her mother everything that had happened since she left Hatchita. About Robert and the cabin in the mountains, about Ethan and the life she had built. She did not mention her father, did not ask about him. She simply wanted her mother to know she was loved and safe and happy. She did not expect a response, so when a letter arrived 6 weeks later via the circuit rider, she stared at it in shock. Her mother's handwriting, familiar and dear. With shaking hands, she opened it. Her mother wrote that she was overjoyed to know Eliza was well and married to a good man. She wrote about Thomas, how he had finished school and was working in the store. She wrote that her father had not changed, was still cold and unforgiving, but that she hoped someday he would soften. She ended by saying she loved Eliza and would write again. Eliza cried as she read it, Robert's arms around her, and felt a piece of her heart that had been broken begin to heal. As autumn returned, painting the mountains in red and gold, Eliza realized she was pregnant again. She told Robert one morning as they were having breakfast, watching his face light up with joy. "Another baby," he breathed, coming around the table to pull her into his arms. "We are going to have another baby." This pregnancy was easier than the first, without the fear and shame that had marked Ethan's. Eliza glowed with health, and Robert was even more protective than before, insisting she rest often and taking over even more of the work. Ethan took his first steps that October, lurching across the cabin floor into Robert's waiting arms. Robert whooped with joy, tossing the boy into the air and making him shriek with laughter. Watching them together, Eliza felt a contentment she had never known was possible. Winter came again, but this time Eliza was not afraid. She knew what to expect, knew they had plenty of supplies and each other. The three of them, soon to be four, were snug and warm and happy in their mountain cabin. Sarah came to stay a week before Eliza's time, and on a snowy February morning in 1880, Eliza gave birth to a little girl. The labor was faster this time, and when Sarah placed the baby in her arms, Eliza looked at her daughter's perfect face and felt complete. "What should we name her?" Robert asked, sitting beside Eliza on the bed with Ethan on his lap. "What about Rose?" Eliza suggested. "I always loved that name." "Rose Barrett," Robert said, trying it out. "I like it. Rose Barrett." Ethan leaned forward to peer at his baby sister, his expression curious. "Baby," he said, one of his few words. "Yes, baby sister," Eliza said. "You have to help us take care of her." Life settled into a new rhythm with two children. The cabin rang with laughter and sometimes with tears, but always with love. Robert expanded the loft, adding another room so Ethan could have his own space as he grew. He built Rose a beautiful cradle that rocked gently, carved with flowers and vines. Letters came from Eliza's mother several times a year, full of news from Hatchita and questions about the children. Eliza sent back detailed descriptions, and even a tintype photograph. Robert paid a traveling photographer handsomely to take of their family. When her mother wrote back, she said she had cried seeing Eliza so happy, so loved. The years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. Ethan grew tall and strong, following Robert everywhere, learning to trap and hunt and survive in the mountains. Rose was fearless, climbing trees and chasing after her brother, her laughter ringing through the forest. In 1883, Eliza gave birth to twin boys, Samuel and James, and the cabin was expanded again to accommodate the growing family. Robert thrived as a father and husband. The solitary mountain man was gone, replaced by a man who sang silly songs to make his children laugh, who taught them to read using newspapers from the trading post, who tucked them in every night with stories about the animals and the mountains. He and Eliza grew more in love with each passing year, their bond deepening with every challenge they faced together. One spring evening in 1885, when Ethan was 7 and Rose 5, when the twins were toddling around getting into everything, Eliza stood on the porch of the cabin watching the sunset. Robert came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy?" he asked. "More than I ever thought possible," Eliza said, leaning back against him. "Sometimes I think about that scared girl who arrived here all those years ago, and I can hardly believe how much has changed." "You were always strong," Robert said. "You always had this life in you. You just needed the chance to live it. You gave me that chance. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Robert corrected. He turned her in his arms so she was facing him. "I was half alive before you came. You and the children, you made me whole. Made me into the man I always wanted to be." Eliza kissed him, slow and deep, pouring all her love into it. From inside the cabin came the sounds of their children playing, arguing, laughing. The sounds of a family, of a home. "Do you ever regret it?" Robert asked quietly. "Staying here instead of going back to civilization?" "Never," Eliza said firmly. "This is where I belong, with you, with our children in these mountains. This is home." A letter came later that year that changed things. Eliza's mother wrote that Thomas was getting married and wanted Eliza to come to the wedding if she could. More than that, she wrote that Marcus Vaughn was ill, very ill, and the doctor did not expect him to last the year. He had been asking for Eliza. Eliza stared at the letter for a long time, emotions warring inside her. Part of her wanted to ignore it, to let her father face his end without her. But another part, the part that had loved him once, that remembered him teaching her to count coins in the store and reading to her from the Bible on Sunday evenings, could not quite let go. "What do you want to do?" Robert asked gently. "I do not know," Eliza admitted. "Part of me wants to see him, to show him what I have become, the family I have built. Part of me never wants to see him again." "Whatever you decide, I will support you," Robert said. "We can all go make a trip of it. The children should meet their grandmother, their uncle." In the end, Eliza decided to go. They made the long journey to Hatchita in the late summer of 1885, a trip that took over a week with 4 young children. The town looked exactly as Eliza remembered it, and yet completely different seen through her new eyes. It seemed smaller, dustier, less significant than she remembered. Her mother met them at the edge of town, and when she saw Eliza, she burst into tears. They embraced for a long time, both crying while Robert stood back with the children. Then Eliza's mother knelt down to meet her grandchildren, exclaiming over them, touching their faces with gentle hands. Thomas was there too, taller than Eliza remembered, a young man now instead of a boy. He hugged her fiercely and shook Robert's hand, thanking him for taking care of his sister. "Your father is at the house," Eliza's mother said quietly. "He is in bed most days now. The illness has taken a lot from him." Eliza left the children with Robert and her mother and walked to her childhood home with Thomas. The house looked the same but felt different, emptier somehow. Her mother led her to the back bedroom where her father lay, a shadow of the robust man she remembered. Marcus Vaughn opened his eyes when Eliza entered, and she saw recognition flare in them, followed by something that might have been regret. "Eliza," he whispered, his voice weak. "Father." She stood at the foot of the bed, unsure what to say, what to feel. "I was wrong," he said, the words clearly costing him. "I was wrong to send you away, wrong to choose pride over my daughter. I see that now when it is too late." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. "It is not too late to say you are sorry. I am sorry, more sorry than you can know." He struggled to sit up a little. "Your mother told me about your husband, your children. She showed me the photograph. You look happy." "I am happy, Father, very happy." "Good, that is good." He closed his eyes, exhausted. "Will you forgive me?" Eliza thought about it, about all the pain and fear and shame she had carried for so long. She thought about Robert and the children, about the life she had built from the ashes of her old one. "I forgive you," she said finally. "I do not forget, but I forgive you." Her father died 3 days later, peacefully in his sleep. Eliza mourned him, mourned the relationship they might have had if he had been a different man, but she did not regret leaving. The mountains and Robert and her children were her life now. They stayed for Thomas's wedding, and Eliza's mother was delighted to spend time with her grandchildren. She particularly doted on Ethan, seeing something of her late husband in the boy's serious nature. When it came time to leave, she made Eliza promise to write more often and to visit again. "You could come stay with us," Eliza suggested. "The mountains are beautiful and there is plenty of room." Her mother smiled sadly. "This is my home, dear, but I am so glad you found yours." The journey back to the mountains felt like coming home in a way the trip to Hatchita had not. As the wagon climbed into the high country and the familiar peaks came into view, Eliza felt herself relax. Beside her, Robert smiled. "Glad to be back?" he asked. "So glad," Eliza said. "I needed to go, needed to make peace with the past, but this is where I belong." The children cheered when the cabin came into sight, and Bear came bounding out to greet them, barking joyfully. They all piled out of the wagon, running inside to see if everything was as they left it, laughing and talking over each other. That night, after the children were asleep and the fire burned low, Robert and Eliza sat together on the porch looking up at the stars. "I have been thinking," Robert said. "Maybe it is time to build a bigger house. The cabin has served us well, but we have outgrown it. A real house." Eliza asked, excited by the idea. "A real house. 2 stories, proper bedrooms, a kitchen big enough for all of us to fit, maybe even a parlor." He grinned at her. "What do you say?" "I say yes. Absolutely yes." They spent the next year building their new home, with help from the few neighbors scattered through the mountains. It rose on a hill overlooking a meadow, built of good timber and stone, solid and beautiful. There were 4 bedrooms upstairs, a large kitchen and dining area, a parlor with a real fireplace, even a small study where Eliza could write her letters and keep the household accounts. They moved in on Eliza's 28th birthday in December of 1886, and it felt like a new beginning. The children ran through the rooms, claiming spaces, exclaiming over the luxury of so much room. That first night in the new house, lying in a real bed in their own bedroom, Robert pulled Eliza close. "Happy birthday," he whispered. "Best birthday ever," she replied, kissing him. The years continued to pass, full and rich. Ethan grew into a fine young man, as comfortable in the mountains as his father, with his mother's thoughtful nature. Rose was wild and beautiful, fearless in her pursuits, whether climbing rocks or learning to shoot. The twins were inseparable, always getting into mischief together, keeping everyone on their toes. In 1890, Eliza gave birth to one more child, another girl they named Grace. She was a surprise, coming when Eliza thought her childbearing years were done, but a welcome one. Robert, now in his early 40s, was completely smitten with the baby, doting on her shamelessly. Eliza's mother came to visit that summer, making the long journey with Thomas and his wife. She stayed for 2 months, filling the house with her presence, teaching the grandchildren recipes and songs, helping Eliza with the endless work of running a large household. When she left, she cried and made them promise to visit again soon. Life in the mountains was not always easy. There were hard winters when game was scarce and supplies ran low. There were injuries and illnesses that Sarah could not always cure, sending them on desperate rides to the nearest town for a doctor. There were years when the fur trade was poor and money was tight. But through it all, Eliza and Robert faced everything together, their love growing stronger with each challenge. In 1895, when Ethan was 17, a young woman arrived in the settlement, her story eerily similar to Eliza's. She was pregnant and alone, sent away by her family in disgrace. Eliza took one look at the fear in her eyes and knew what she had to do. "You will stay with us," she said firmly. "We have room and you will be safe here." Robert did not even question it, just nodded his agreement. The young woman, whose name was Catherine, stayed through her pregnancy and the birth of her son. She helped Eliza with the household and the children, and slowly her fear gave way to hope. A year later, she married a trapper who came through regularly, a good man who loved her and her son. At the wedding, she hugged Eliza tightly. "You saved my life," she whispered. "You gave me a second chance." "Someone did the same for me once," Eliza said, looking over at Robert, who was dancing with Grace. "I am just passing it on." The new century came, bringing changes to the mountains. The railroad pushed closer, towns sprang up, and the wild isolation began to fade. But the Barrett family stayed, choosing their life in the high country over the lure of civilization. Their house became a stopping point for travelers, a place of refuge and warmth. Eliza gained a reputation as someone who would help anyone in need, while Robert was known as fair and honest in all his dealings. Ethan decided to stay in the mountains when he came of age, taking over more and more of the trapping and hunting from Robert. He married a schoolteacher who came west looking for adventure, and they built their own cabin not far from the main house. Rose, true to her nature, married a horse trader and moved to Wyoming, though she visited often with her growing family. The twins went into business together, starting a logging operation that proved quite successful. As Robert and Eliza grew older, their love remained constant. They still sat together on the porch in the evenings, still held hands, still looked at each other with the same devotion they had felt as newlyweds. Their hair went gray, their hands grew gnarled, but their hearts stayed young. In the spring of 1910, on the 32nd anniversary of Eliza's arrival in the mountains, Robert took her on a picnic to the meadow where he had first told her he loved her. They were in their 60s now, grandparents many times over, but they could still make each other laugh, still found joy in each other's company. "You remember that first day?" Robert asked, pouring her a cup of coffee from the thermos. "When you walked into the trading post looking so scared and trying so hard to be brave. I remember thinking you were the biggest man I had ever seen," Eliza said with a smile, "and wondering if I was making a terrible mistake. Were you making a mistake?" "The best mistake of my life," she said, leaning over to kiss him. "You gave me everything, Robert. A home, a family, love. You gave me myself." "You gave me the same," Robert said softly. "I was just a man living in the woods before you. You made me into something better. You made me a husband, a father, a man worth being." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the clouds drift across the sky. Then Eliza said, "I want you to promise me something, anything. When I am gone, I want to be buried here in these mountains. This is my home where I belong." "I promise," Robert said, his voice thick. "But you are going to outlive me by 20 years at least. You are too stubborn to go first." Eliza laughed. "We will see about that." But Robert was wrong. Eliza passed away peacefully in her sleep in the winter of 1918, with Robert holding her hand and their children gathered around. She was 60 years old, and she had lived a full, rich life, beyond anything she could have imagined as that scared young woman arriving in the mountains so long ago. Robert buried her in the meadow she loved, with a simple stone marker. He visited every day, talking to her, telling her about the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, about the changing of the seasons, about how much he missed her. He lived 3 more years, cared for by his children and grandchildren, before passing away on a spring morning with the windows open and the smell of pine in the air. They buried him beside Eliza, and on his stone they carved, "Beloved husband and father who welcomed the lost and loved without condition." The house passed to Ethan, who kept it in the family. Generations of Barretts lived there, each adding their own story to the walls. But the core of it all, the foundation on which everything else was built, was the love between Robert and Eliza, the mountain man who opened his heart and the woman who arrived in shame but left in glory. Years later, Grace, who lived to be 96, would tell her own grandchildren the story. "Your great-grandmother came to these mountains with nothing but a broken heart and the clothes on her back," she would say. "And your great-grandfather, who everyone said was too rough and wild to ever settle down, took her in. They built a life together, a family, a legacy of love and acceptance. They proved that it does not matter where you come from or what mistakes you have made. What matters is the choices you make going forward, the love you give, and the family you choose to build. That is the real story, and that is what I want you to remember." And they did remember, passing the story down through the generations, keeping alive the memory of the mountain man who welcomed a woman in shame and gave her a life beyond her wildest dreams, and the woman who took that gift and built an empire of love that lasted long after both of them were gone.